Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It's 12:24 a.m., Thursday, the 3rd of April. I do not know what's going on with me. I'm eating a lot less and sleeping a lot less. It's like I'm a new Bruce or something. I've never quite experienced anything like this. Yeah. Or maybe this is just an affectation of getting old. I don't know. But yeah, I'm able to get by on 3 or 4 hours of sleep these days. I like to get up early now. I like to be engaging the day just as that first sunlight is coming up. Not right at dawn, which is about 4:45 here, but pretty close to it. Tonight I'm going to tell you a story. I haven't done like a story in a long time. And this story is going to explain to you how the real spirit works. And there's a lot of confusion about this in people. And again, it all comes down to the language. The language is so maligned, so misunderstood. You just take the word spirit, it could mean so many things, and none of them are really wrong, right? And the thing about a language is you can't really change it midstream. Let's take a look at this word. Spirit definition. Okay, so what do we got here? Oxford Languages. Okay, that's a good enough dictionary. And it's obviously a noun. It's also a verb, actually. Um, they give two definitions. The non-physical part of a person, which is the seat of emotions and character, semicolon, the soul. Okay. Those qualities regarded as forming the definitive or typical elements in the character of a person, nation, or group, or in the thought and attitude of a particular period. The university is a symbol of the nation's egalitarian spirit, is the example they give. And as a verb, it's to convey rapidly and secretly, so spirit them away. Stolen cows were spirited away some distance to prevent detection. It says show more, so I think this this doesn't surprise me, actually. This is how polluted this word is. Um, so again, so they're going by, oh, they've got, okay, this is, this is, I wish you guys could see this. This is one of the most complicated and contradictory words I've ever looked up. Man, it must be just an absolute nightmare trying to learn English as a second language. um, so they give a supernatural being, as in shrines to nature spirits, and the Holy Spirit, and they capitalize Holy Spirit, capital H, capital S, and that's a noun. It's a spirit, but they don't really define what it is. Okay. And in the second definition, which I already read to you, those qualities regarded as forming the definitive or typical elements in the character of a person, nation, or group, or in the thought and attitudes of a particular period. A person identified with their most prominent mental or moral characteristics or with their role in a group or movement. Specified emotion or mood, especially one prevailing at a particular time, a person's mood, the attitude or intentions with which someone undertakes or regards something. These are all nouns. The second noun definition. The quality of courage, energy, and determination or assertiveness. The real meaning or the intention behind something as opposed to its strict verbal interpretation. And then here's 3. This is the third primary definition, okay? And that this is the numbered 1, 2, 3. So when I read all of those lines and definitions or sub-definitions, those are all under one of the numbered things. And there's a fourth too. So really complicated word. I'm glad I did this because it just shows you how hard it is to work with this language. But tonight I'm going to give it more a clearer definition, like the way I did with detachment and apathy. It's almost becoming a language podcast in a lot of ways. What a geek I am. This is pathetic. Anyways, so number 3, they say it's British. The origin of this utility of the word spirit. Strong distilled liquor such as brandy, whiskey, gin, or rum. And the sub-definitions on number 3 are a volatile liquid, especially a fuel prepared by distillation. A solution of volatile components extracted from something, typically by distillation or by solution in alcohol. And 4, it's also archaic. A highly refined substance or fluid thought to govern vital phenomenon. Holy spumoli, man. And that's a verb. This is unbelievable. They give examples of phrases. Enter into the spirit. Join wholeheartedly in an event, especially one of celebration and festivity, in spirit. In thought or intention, though not physically. He's here in spirit. Lift someone's spirits. Cause someone to become more cheerful. What a shit show, man. I mean, this language has needed an upgrade for quite some time now. Okay. I guess that's a good enough definition. I mean, that's the Oxford language definition, right? So it's pretty thorough. So tonight I'm going to tell the story of the Russian princess case. This is a nonfiction book that I wrote in, I think I started it in like 2002 and I finished it in 2005. It's the biggest book I've ever written. There's it's up on Amazon. You can get it in Kindle for like $1.99. You can get it in paperback for like, I think it's $24.95 or something like that. And recently I did an audiobook of it because about a week and a half ago, Amazon came out with their AI audiobook creation system, and it's pretty good. So you can get an audiobook of that for I think I priced it at $14.99. And if you like true crime nonfiction, this is one of the most interesting murders in Toronto history. It was the talk of the town for 3 or 4 years as the trial went through and everything. And this was right around the time I remember it was like January 95 the murder happened, and I had come back from Taiwan in October 94. So the two things that I remember most about coming back from my 2 years in Southeast Asia, pre-internet, by the way. So when you're there, you're there. You're not watching American television. You're not doing anything like that, right? It's just you're there. It's a full immersion. And so the two things were Pulp Fiction and the death of Elena Chudakova. That was her name. Um, so everything that I've written is haunting. Everything I've written has whether it's literary fiction, true crime, or this metafiction I started writing. I call it metafiction because it's so weird you can't really call it nonfiction, although it is nonfiction. Or speculative nonfiction, you could call it. I mean, there are no words. I'm in a brand new territory here, right? And here I'm talking about Stardust Ranch, Light of Darkness, Galactic Historian, and The Devil in Us. These are completely new ways of writing, completely new ways of telling stories. And the art of telling a story is putting something down on paper for a sustained length. And the length of a book is about 80,000 words, 80, 85, 90,000 words. Depending on the typesetting, that'll bring the book in at about anywhere from 240 to 265 pages. And that'll be like a normal typesetting. Maybe even, I might even do my typesetting a little tighter than like the big publishing houses. And it's the ability to tell a story. It's the ability to get a hook into somebody, like to literally hook them like a fish, and to just hold them on the line of the story for the 80, 85,000 words. And when they're done, if if you take your craft and your art and the spirit of what you do and the seriousness of what you do, um, if you take it up with honor and discipline and the pursuit of perfection, you want people to hit the end of that experience glad that they did it. Okay? And you can't just be entertaining people. Entertainment is the cheapest way to tell a story. Okay? And so I don't know, what really sets the hook. I'm not sure people can even read literature anymore. I mean, a lot of people still do. I'm not sure, I think they do it as a sort of mental discipline and just to say they did it. So like reading Dostoevsky and things like this, which, by the way, you should do. I mean, Dostoevsky, if you want to understand the Russian soul, read Dostoevsky. And the human soul, read Dostoevsky. Um, but this was me throwing my hat into true crime nonfiction. And it was a horrible, I didn't even want to publish the book. In fact, I published it. I redid the typesetting and I published it when I published Stardust Ranch. And so I finished the book in 2005, and I didn't publish it until January 2020. I waited 15 years. And the reason I did that is, number one, when I finished it in like 2005, I had contacted all the people who had been around in 1995, and some of them gave me interviews, and some of them didn't want to go near it. And I can tell you that in real life, unlike television and movies, they don't capture murder properly in popular culture. Murder is, especially violent murder, and especially murder that is not, the story never really closes. It's not cut and dry, like the husband stabbed or poisoned her husband or his wife, or vice versa, or the husband strangled his wife. That's like, you go, yeah, hey, that's, a little bit sad. I'm sorry they couldn't work it out. I'm sorry that that marriage ended in death, you know? Or like some of the youngsters in my family who got themselves killed getting into this nefarious business of narco trafficking. It's kind of that's a murder, but it's understandable in a sense. You can understand the cause and effect. Like, he shouldn't have gotten into that. He did, and this is what happened. And but this murder, this was an unbelievable murder. And murder like this, like the death of the Russian princess Elena Chudakova, it haunts people. I remember interviewing people like, in the middle of 2005, like a full decade after the murder, and just having them break down right in front of you. Like, having to remember these things. And I remember feeling a little bit ghoulish. Like, true crime nonfiction is a really shitty way to make a living. And so I spent like 2 years, 2.5 years of my life full time. I used up all my savings to write this book. I had access to the case files given to me by the Association in Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted. So why did I wait till 2020 to publish it? I didn't want to put all the people who knew about the murder through all that pain again. I didn't want that on me. And I didn't think that there was a spiritual reason to publish the book, because I didn't turn up any definitive evidence that would change the fate of the man who got convicted for the crime. And so I ate it, in the sense that I ate 2.5 years of work. I ate losing my savings, all of these things, and I just put that book on ice. And then something spoke to me in 2020 when I finished Stardust Ranch, and it said, hey, publish this book at the same time now that you're going to be publishing on Amazon. And so I did. And I don't know how many copies it sold. Not many. Like, I think I've sold like maybe 20, 25 copies of that book in 5 years. It always freaks me out whenever I sell a copy of that book. I was like, who the hell bought that? It's weird. Um, Yeah, I can tell you exactly right now. Um, yeah, I think I might sell a few more copies now that I have now that I have an audio book. So Life of Title. Oh, actually, I've sold a few copies of this. Um, it gives me the figures in doesn't give me the number of it just tells you how much you've sold in US dollars. Um, and just your royalties too. That's interesting. Um, so I don't know. I've sold maybe 50 copies of this book. I've made like $349 on it and 14 cents. That's what 2.5 years of my life is worth, plus 4 years getting a journalism degree. Don't become writers, kids. It's just you're better off being a bricklayer or a welder. Um, now that said, there's a satisfaction in writing that it's unmatched. I have to say that for sure. So this story completely boggled my mind, and it was like a dark obsession for about 5 years of my life. And I came to understand detectives a lot better. I came to understand policing, and I came to a much greater respect for it. Even though I think they got this case wrong, it was so complicated, and there were four possible suspects who killed this murder. This woman, young woman, 23 years old, and all four of them were strong candidates. Like you could have made a case. She was very beautiful, Russian, Jewish, um, very free spirited, and she emigrated to Canada. She had been in Canada for just a few years, and she used her beauty to its full extent. Um, you know, and you could say that she played it as much as she could. You're right. Like men fell in love with her, and they never got over this woman. She was like insanely seductive. It was like a movie. And of the four possible characters, or the four possible suspects, the one that they ended up pinning the murder on was the easiest guy to convict because he had weaknesses in his character that it made it easy for the police to sort of bully him in the interviews. But it was pretty obvious he didn't do it, at least to me, looking at it like when I started the book 8 years after the murder. And it was extremely disturbing. So it happened in like right after Christmas. I think the murder was around January 5th. And Elena was in her apartment dead for about a week before she was found. And she had been tied to the bed by the wrists and ankles on her back. and she had been murdered with a hammer. And she had been hit 23 times with both the blunt and the claw end of the hammer. So right away, it's weird, right? Because in crimes of passion, the man usually kills by strangulation. It's a very personal form of killing. Very, very personal. Okay? And this was like a psycho killing. And then after she was hammered in the head, the ligatures, she was tied up with nylons. The ligatures were cut. She was taken to the bathroom, and she was up on like the 20th floor of an apartment building. For those of you who know Toronto, it was right where you go over the bridge into Greektown there around the DuPont and no, not DuPont, but Broadview and Davenport or something like that. Right around where Greektown starts. For those of you who know Toronto, those of you who don't, you don't have a clue what I'm talking about. And she was put in the bathtub, and then the bathtub was sort of half filled up with water. And then Pine Sol was put into the bathtub. And that was done by somebody who was thinking. Again, not a crime of passion, right? Pine Sol will destroy DNA. There's a number of things that can like take your DNA off somebody. So that's why it was done. And I saw the crime scene video. It was part of the it was part of the case files. And it's one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of disturbing things, man. I just spent 6 months with a demon working on a book. I shit you not. But this was disturbing. Anyways, me being me, I asked Spirit to help me figure this out. Now, Elena was speaking to me all the way through the book. She was giving me dreams, and it was her. She had not left. And this idea that some people, and again, this is another example of how I've come to my understanding of the other side. It's not just my meditations and going there. It's these very concrete things that have happened to me, like the ghost story at the cottage, like the Russian princess case, and other things. And coupled with the meditation and going out of my mind-body consciousness. I don't call it remote viewing, and I just call it traveling. That's what I call it. You can, and again, this goes back to one of the earlier podcasts in the last 4 or 5 days where I'm talking about evolution. And the evolutionary ladder is demarcated by motion and movement. And you start in the spiritual energy starts in the minerals and then works it up. And then the final form is the one in which the spirit can escape the physical form while the physical form is still alive. That's the peak of evolution on this planet. And that's us, by the way. And, just as I say this out loud, I mean, nobody does it. I find it the most fascinating thing about being alive. I mean, I've already meditated 2 hours today. I love it. Just because I understand it. I understand how human it is. It's not exotic to me. I've been doing it for over 40 years. Some days it's a bit flat. It's just like you sit there for an hour, nothing really happens. You're just sort of relaxing. And then other times, wow, it's crazy. Anyway, so there was a lot of overlap with Elena. She gave me a lot of dreams. She was really there. And it kind of freaked my girlfriend out at the time. I would wake up speaking to Elena, and she told me who was responsible for killing her, but she could not articulate how it was done. There's like even you got to understand it can be a little difficult for the spirit world, the world of disembodied human beings, to communicate with us because they have to do it sort of pictographically. They have to do it in dreams. Um, and if the actual murder, and in this case, the actual murder was perpetrated by a contract killer, the guy I always thought did it, he actually did it. I can't say any names. I don't want to get sued. Even 25 years later, this is still a very sensitive topic. And it impacts the reputation and career of two homicide detectives in Toronto because they got it wrong. And that's got to be really haunting when you think about it. That's got to be incredibly haunting for a detective to know that he or she got something wrong and somebody went to jail for 25 years and they were innocent. You know, people, not everybody is psychopathic, right? A lot of people still have their conscience, and stuff like that's very difficult to live with. So, one of the things that happens when you meditate a lot is you speed everything up because you're trying to reach a state of consciousness in a lifetime. And to get to that state of consciousness, you got to cycle through your karma. And so, what the meditative state will do is it'll speed up your life. Some paths, they say that if when you come to a serious and disciplined spiritual life and you're close to maybe not coming back here anymore, not having to reincarnate here anymore, in that last lifetime where you take up practice, you may well be living the equivalent of 7 lifetimes in one life in terms of the events that happen to you. And as you folks have gotten to know me through my books and the Talamanca Review, it's kind of true, isn't it? Like I've got like a half dozen lives crammed into this life and I'm only 58. I still have another 30 years to go. And hopefully these last 30 years will be very service oriented, very much about helping other people energetically and in every way possible. I hope it is anyways. That's my wish. It's everything's in God's hands. We don't control anything. It's just an illusion. You want to make God laugh? Tell him your plans. Or better yet, tell him your wife's plans. um, so this book almost broke me. In fact, I'd say it did break me. That I went like fully crazy for a couple years after writing this book. I broke up with my girlfriend. This is the only girlfriend I ever had after my son's mom until I came here and married Rosemary. Right? And that book broke us up. So I really wanted to know what happened. Okay? Now, why did I take all that time to define spirit? Well, because I'm going to give you my definition of the Holy Spirit. Okay, so my definition of the Holy Spirit is the living, breathing, multidimensional membrane we exist in. It's everything. It's one thing broken up into a bunch of things that look separate. The physical and the astral aren't really separate, they're one thing. The physical, the astral, and the causal aren't really separate, they're one thing. The physical, the astral, the causal, and the mental aren't really four separate planes of existence, they're really just one thing. But you have to learn how to see it. I can't give that to you. It can only be achieved spiritually. And I'm not saying meditation's the only way to do it. I mean, some people just get it. They earned it in a perfect life. They're walking around one day, they get hit by an apple in the head, and they go, I get it. It literally, maybe not the apple, but you know what I mean. Like something stupid happens and they just get it. They just kind of wake up because they did it in a previous life. And they come back because, yeah, well, I don't want to get into that. That's more the science of spirituality and sort of Rudolf Steiner, Madame Blavatsky kind of stuff. I don't like to talk about that stuff too much because it just complicates people. I'll talk about it with certain people, but they have to be serious and they have to have a number of years of work under their belts. So this book just tossed me, man, like the Mexican police going through your vehicle. This book just, it fucking fried me, man. It just like, I wouldn't say I was depressed. I don't really get depressed. But I was kind of fucked up for a few years after writing this book. Really fucked up. And but I don't I knew who did it, but I didn't know how, and I was really frustrated because I wanted to know. I felt that I had earned the right to know. And it turns out that Spirit agreed with me. It's just that Spirit, and here I mean um the um the living, breathing membrane we exist and learn in, the multidimensional membrane we exist and learn in. It's all one spirit. Or, some people use the word consciousness. I like the poetry of spirit a bit better than consciousness. And I have a relationship with this spirit, this membrane we live in. I would call it God, or an aspect of God. And you can learn to talk to it and you can ask it for things. Uh, like if it's related to knowledge and understanding, you're allowed to ask. Okay. And so I said, Spirit, man, I spent like 2.5 years of my life. I almost went crazy writing this book. Not to mention it was a lot of work. I had to go through 5 boxes of interviews and evidence. I had to interview people. I spent like, oh man, about 8 months driving 2 hours outside of Toronto to go to the prison to visit the convicted dude, to ask him questions about what I was going through in the case files. Twice a month for like 8 months. I had to apply for my permission to go and visit him. It's a whole process in Canada. You can't just visit somebody in jail, prison. And because he had no criminal conviction, and they looked at this as a crime of passion, even though the crime scene was so psychotic, they gave him medium security, and he did that for about, I think, 15 years. I heard, and then they moved him to minimum security for the last 10 years. He's a Protestant minister now. He got ordained in prison, found God and got ordained in prison. But this is what happened in 2010. So remember, yeah, I I was living in the west end of Toronto. I was raising my son, and I used to go to this coffee shop every day. For those of you who are Canadian, it was a second cup. It's kind of like a Starbucks knockoff. I think it's unique to Canada. Although I've seen the franchise in like Buffalo and cities close to the Canada border. But for the most part, Americans don't know about it. But in that time, like in 2010, that was a big, big deal. Like people really enjoyed going to coffee shops. And, people used to sit in coffee shops and pretend they were writers. It was a thing. And I really was. I published my first novel in like June of 2007, and they did a feature on me in the Toronto Star. So I really was a writer. And I was a little bit of a celebrity at this coffee shop, mainly because it was a suburb. Like, why is a literary writer living in a suburb? Why isn't he living in Toronto and hanging around with other writers? Now, I had a son to raise. That's why. So I got a lot of special consideration and a lot of respect where I lived. And it's one of the small perks of being a published writer. And believe me, there are very few. And I used to hang out at this coffee shop, and I had this really eclectic assortment of friends. A lot of the Sufi dervishes that I worshipped with for a year were at the coffee shop. A bunch of my other friends. I would occasionally date a woman I met there, but look, man, nobody wants to date a dedicated single dad. We've been through this, right? Especially you ladies who wrote me after that one podcast I did. Women aren't really too interested in a man who's dedicated to children, his own children. Very strange thing, but I don't want to rehash that topic because I already did it. But I would meet women, maybe a good relationship would last like 6 weeks, 2 months. You wouldn't get too close. You'd have a little bit of fun. You'd get to have some physical intimacy. And then you just kind of find an excuse to become friends and not do that anymore. And I would meet girls or women at the coffee shop as well. And I had this one friend, he died 2 years ago. His name I can say. His name was Tim Armstrong. And Tim had been busted out in a scam by the Italian mafia. It was a horse racing scam. And he thought he was on the inside, but he was the mark. And they took him for his life savings, which was about $250,000. And he had he had been from a town a couple hours away from where I lived. Oh, actually only about an hour away. But he had moved to where I lived because his son lived there, and he was so broke he had to move in with his adult son. And we all heard his story and everything. And then one day in 2010, this guy came to the coffee shop. And I remember when I met him, I felt almost physically ill and I almost fainted. It was a very dramatic thing to meet him. And he had been talking to Tim quite a bit because Tim had told him the story about having his life savings stolen from him. And this guy for $20,000 offered to have the guy killed that ripped Tim off. And it turned out that this guy, whose name I can't say because I can't libel him, it hasn't been proven that he did what I'm suggesting he did, so I can't say his name. But Tim told me, he said, hey, you'll never guess what so-and-so said. He offered to have this guy in Guelph killed for $20,000. I said, Tim, you meet the most interesting people. And Tim went, no, it's for real. He's not a made guy, but he grew up in the Calabrian mafia in Toronto, and he does this. And I said, Tim, are you really seriously thinking of having somebody killed? And by the way, where are you going to get $20,000? You're broke. And he said, no, he said, it's just a fantasy I have, Bruce. I'm not going to pay $20,000 to have the guy killed. And then later I met the guy that arranges the contract killings and Tim at the same time. And because he'd already told Tim what he did for a living, among other criminal activities, he thought I was sort of cool to talk to. And we got to know each other. And being a writer, I like to meet all kinds of people, right? And I knew that this was a Calabrian, a rounder. A rounder is someone who's around the mob but not made. Kind of like Christopher Moltisanti before he gets made in the Soprano crime family in The Sopranos, right? Most of the work in the mafia is done by rounders. The made men just sit back and live off the protection money, the protection they offer criminals. And so this gentleman had been doing murders for a couple decades. I've met a lot of different kinds of people. I've met everybody. I met everything from saints to contract killers. Everybody in between. My life has just been this way. I've met every kind of human being. And then one day this guy, this is about the third week I know him. For some reason, he really likes me. And he starts coming to our coffee shop, even though he doesn't really live in that part of Toronto. His ex-wife, he was in the process of getting a divorce, which was very unusual for Italians, but not that unusual when you get to know this guy. I can't believe anybody even loved him in the first place. He was a very vile human being. He had a very, very negative vibration. A killer vibration, a sadistic vibration, right? And one day he was telling me about, some beefs he'd been in with the police and how the whole legal system just screws with you. The police will lie, the Crown prosecutors will lie. And his point was, look, you got to understand, Bruce, I've lived this. And you straight middle class mangy cake white people like a McDonald, you don't understand how corrupt this system is. I do, because I'm a criminal. You think it's a fair and egalitarian system, but it isn't. And I said, let's just call him Roberto. That's not his name, though. I said, oh, you'd be surprised what I know about this system, Roberto. I wrote a true crime nonfiction book. He goes, oh, yeah? I said, yeah. It's the Russian princess case, the Elena Chudakova case. All the blood went out of his face. He said, I knew that girl. I said, really? He said, yeah. She used to eat at my restaurant and she painted a mural on the wall. And I said, well, I've been through all the court cases, and that is her last known source of income was that mural she was painting, but you're not documented in the interviews as the owner of the restaurant. He says, Bruce, I don't own anything on paper. When you live the kind of life I do, you're a silent owner. Somebody else puts their names on the corporate papers. I said, oh. And then I start to list all the people in the case and the four suspects and everything, because this is 5 years after I finished the book. And I thought, oh, finally God is answering my question. I said, well, and then it didn't dawn on me right away that Roberto set up the murder of this girl. And he let me know very quickly, though, that first night we talked about it. He didn't come right out and say it, but the way he behaved and everything. And then it got really dicey. Like I came very close to getting killed. They were I won't go into all the details, but I came very close to getting killed. But my point in telling you this story, and I don't know why I told the Russian princess case tonight, is spirit will answer any question. All right. And then I had to leave the west end of Toronto for 2 years. I went like an hour and a half west of there into a little high-tech town of about 200,000 people, got an apartment and got a 3-year tech writing job there. And my son would come out by bus on the weekends to see me. He was about 12 years old at the time. But that's how scary it got. I thought I was going to get murdered by the Calabrian mob because I uncovered a murder that they participated in as contract killers. And so the point in telling you this story is spirit will answer any question you ask. And it took 5 years to get it answered because had I been told any sooner, I would have probably done something stupid. But all I did was I wrote up a 15-page report about my meeting with Roberto. I sent it to the Association in Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted and the partner in the private investigation firm that was handling the case and had had it on their books for 10 years. And this was a $100 million a year private investigation firm. And then my report was submitted to the defense lawyers' annual meeting for the Association in Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted. And these are the dozen most prominent criminal defense lawyers in Toronto and Ontario, the largest province in Canada. And when my report was given to them and discussed at the annual meeting, they go, how did the writer figure this out? And they all knew I figured it out, that in fact, this was the guy who, this is how she died. But everybody also simultaneously realized that we couldn't do anything for the guy in jail. There was no way to prove it. So I became this sort of like little legend in the defense lawyer community in Toronto because of the fact that I figured out the Russian princess case, and it had baffled people for a decade, and by this time, 15 years. And it was almost impossible to figure out, but spirit untied all the knots. And that's my show tonight. I just thought I'd tell another story, like a simple ghost story, and I've never told you guys the story of the Russian princess case. My buddy Jim in Panama actually read the Russian princess case, and it's a good read if you want to read another book, and if you like true crime. It's a real whodunit. Anyways, that's the Talamanca Review for tonight. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.